The Canadian province of Newfoundland is the easternmost part of North America, extending out into the Atlantic Ocean south of the great white frozen mass of Greenland. Seen right in the center of this map, Newfoundland is actually a triangular-shaped island, about the size of New York State, which can be reached only by boat or by plane. In the summer of 1980, Robbins and Margaret Barstow from Wethersfield, Connecticut, had the opportunity to visit Newfoundland for the first time. When our plane got down beneath the clouds, we could see the many ocean inlets along the irregular coastline, and also a surprising number of inland lakes. We landed at a small airport near the province's capital city of St. John's, and as the two of us disembarked, a glimpse of the Canadian maple leaf flag reminded us that we were now in a different country. The city of St. John's has a long and colorful history. Located on the eastern end of the island, the city marks the beginning of the more than 5,000-kilometer Trans-Canada Highway. This is Mile Zero, near City Hall on the main street. Like San Francisco, St. John's rises on the edge of a deep-water ocean harbor, and its steep streets are enlivened by houses painted in different colors. The depth of the harbor makes it a favored port for ocean-going commerce, and its international importance is evidenced by this large cargo ship from Russia. This narrow entranceway to a deep-water inlet just north of the city is typical of Newfoundland's rugged coastline. The province's economy is heavily dependent upon fishing, and although the scenery is highly picturesque, the life of most Newfoundlanders much of the time is harsh and severe. This small fishing village and harbor were the location for filming scenes for the 1981 TV movie, A Whale for the Killing. Near the center of St. John's is the famous Hotel Newfoundland, and it was here that we were to meet other members of our Newfoundland excursion group. We had signed up for a one-week visit to Trinity Bay for the prime purpose of whale watching. The van sent to pick us up at the hotel was driven by an old friend of ours, Ben Baxter from Newington, Connecticut. The pleasure of seeing him again added to the excitement as we loaded our bags into the van for the 3-hour drive to the place we would be staying for the next week. We headed west on the first leg of the Trans-Canada Highway, which, of course, after crossing Newfoundland, requires a ferry to get over to the mainland for traversing the rest of Canada. We drove past ocean inlets, bays, and fjords, which give the island such an irregular coastline, and then we turned north and east to follow the signs to the small town of Trinity on a picturesque peninsula pointing out into Trinity Bay. Our destination was the Village Inn, identified by road signs with a humpback whale's tail. These views, taken from an airplane on a later date, provide a clear picture of the unique topography that makes this small peninsula so interesting. It sticks out like a giant thumb into the offshore waters of Trinity Bay. The little village of Trinity is nestled at the base of the thumb, and right in the middle of the settlement is the square 2-story white building, which is the Village Inn. There are boat docks on both sides of the thumb's base, and a single roadway outlines the peninsula's perimeter. The waters of Trinity Bay are accessible by boat from either side. Trinity is a small and ancient village of fisher folk and boat builders, whose lives are closely connected to the waters surrounding the rocky promontory on which they have built their homes. The Village Inn is owned and operated by a noted Canadian scientist and whale researcher, Dr. Peter Beamish, who for many years has been studying the humpback whales in particular, which summer in the North Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Newfoundland and frequently feed in Trinity Bay. Following the narrow, twisting streets through the town, our van arrived at the village inn to find Dr. Beamish waiting on the front steps to greet us. Peter had visited us at our home in Wethersfield when he had been on lecture tours in previous years, so seeing him again was like a mini reunion. The second floor of the inn is set aside for guest rooms, with the first floor containing parlors, dining room, kitchen, and library. On the wall inside the front door we saw drawings by Connecticut artist Donald Sonetti of the 8 species of whales which can be found in the North Atlantic. On the top left is the bowhead whale, then the right whale and the orca. In the middle are the fin whale and the minke, and on the right are the sperm whale, the humpback, and the small white beluga whale. The 3 whale species which we were most likely to encounter were the fin, the humpback, and the minke. The minke is the smallest of the great whales, growing to only about 30 feet in length. It moves swiftly, usually surfacing for only a quick breath and rapidly diving again, so one is lucky to get even a glimpse of a minke whale with its small pointed dorsal fin. The fin whale is second in size only to the 100-foot blue whale and grows up to 80 feet in length. Its long, streamlined body and strong horizontal tail allow it to swim at such high speeds that the fin whale has been called the greyhound of the sea. The favorite species of most North American whale watchers, however, is the humpback whale. It grows to be 45 feet in length and has long white flippers extending out almost like wings, which it uses to guide its underwater glides. Its powerful tail is exceptionally beautiful, with varying white and black markings underneath and little pointed tips on each side. This painting by Richard Ellis shows the close bond between mother and calf, with their backs colored by the sun. This is Don Sonetti's drawing of humpbacks in love. After a good night's sleep at the inn, Meg and I were eager for our first trip out to look at these wondrous whales. We had come prepared with blue woolen shirts, on the backs of which Meg had carefully embroidered the outlines of a humpback and a sperm whale. We learned that for all boat excursions on these sometimes rough and always cold Newfoundland waters, we all needed to wear life jackets. As supplied by Dr. Beamish, they were brightly colored and fit nice and snugly once we managed to get them zipped up. There were a number of family groups with children who had come to Trinity to participate in this special week of whale-watching adventures with Peter Beamish. As we set out together from the inn that first morning, Peter seemed like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, leading the crowd on the walk through the town to the boat dock. With our bright red life jackets, we made a colorful procession strolling along the village streets. Near the dock, we passed the site of one of the oldest British settlements in North America, dating back to the late 1500s. Our first whale-watching excursion was to be on a sailboat. Dr. Beamish had chartered the boat for the day, with its bright orange maple leaf Canadian flag flying in the breeze. The local captain welcomed the opportunity to take this mixed group of tourists from various parts of Canada and the United States out to the whales' feeding grounds, and we were eager to come aboard and get underway. As the boat made its way under power out of the harbor and into the open ocean part of the bay, we wondered what lay in store for us this day. Part of the excitement of whale watching is never knowing exactly what will happen, or just when or where whales may appear. We all gathered on the foredeck and kept our eyes peering at the sea's surface, looking for spouts. The first sign of whales is usually a small puff of white mist rising on top of the water where a whale has surfaced to breathe, expelling stale air from its lungs, which condenses in the cold surface atmosphere. Who will be the first to see one of these white puffs? There, a spout. And there's another one. 2 whales. We are in luck. As we kept watching the surface, we saw more and more spouts, and then came the thrill of seeing a pair of flukes, the broad tail, rising out of the water and then disappearing as the whale heads down into its underwater realm. Soon we found ourselves surrounded on all sides by numbers of these incredible leviathans. They were humpback whales, and sometimes we could see the water, the greenish-white flipper before the whale's back broke the surface. We all kept cameras at the ready. They are called humpback whales because when they dive, they put their heads down and arch their backs in a great hump, and then raise their tails in a graceful curve, displaying the beautiful serrated flukes with the pointed tips. Did you get that photo? Great. We spent most of this day watching and photographing these wondrous marine mammals, amazed at how close they came to our sightseeing boat. A special thrill was seeing this mother and calf. On the way back to the dock, we all felt we had had a wonderful introduction to the humpbacks of Trinity Bay. The next day, it started out raining, so we decided to take a trip by car to see some inland scenery. Peter took us to a beautiful lake surrounded by wooded hills, where he gave some of the youngsters a lesson in fly fishing, while some of us oldsters enjoyed the view from a hilltop overlooking one of the fjords. We wondered what the whales were doing today out there in the ocean depths beyond. Food had been brought along for a big family picnic in this idyllic setting. I particularly relished the taste of something I hadn't had for many years, peanut butter and honey sandwiches. Good. Not far from our picnic site, we found a small group of horses. During the summertime, these horses are left wild to roam the hillsides and feed on their own. They do useful farm work for their owners when they are rounded up in fall and spring. We approached them cautiously, and a few of the horses allowed us to pet them, which we did, gingerly. The following morning, even though the sky was overcast, we got ready for our second whale-watching excursion, wearing the heavy blue rain gear we had brought along. This time, we departed from the boat dock on the other side of the Trinity Peninsula, where boat building is still carried on. We observed 2 long, square logs being carefully trimmed into rounded masts. Ben Baxter was checking out the small inflatable rubber boats called Zodiacs, which we might be using on this trip. We shook hands with the captain as we boarded the small single-masted sailboat on which half of our group was traveling this day. At one time, both Canada and the United States were major whaling nations, but like the U.S., Canada stopped its commercial whale killing in the early 1970s. As we headed out, another passenger from Connecticut, Frank Gardner, pointed out to Meg the site of a former Canadian whaling station. 2 young crew members on this trip were whale researchers Numi Spitzer and Jeff Goodyear. Jeff was later featured in the outstanding educational TV series The Voyage of the Mimi. A motor launch carried the other half of our group this day, so we would have double access to whatever whales we might encounter. And sure enough, as soon as we got out to their ocean realm, there were the whales' spouts, backs, and exquisite tails. We could see the large double blowholes on the tops of their heads as they surfaced to breathe, before humping their broad backs and lifting up those graceful sky-pointing flukes. We were indeed to have the unique experience this day of seeing the whales from right on the surface of the water, live and up close. We took turns getting down into one of the Zodiacs and following the whales on their own level with an outboard motor, being careful not to disturb or harass them. What a thrill this was! We could touch the water with our hands, and from this small surface platform we could see the tails of different whales dramatically silhouetted against the sky. One after the other, they would elevate their flukes and dive. What a procession of awesome wonder. And then came a heart-stopping experience. We had turned the motor off and were just using a paddle to maneuver the boat when all of a sudden we looked out and saw a family of humpback whales heading right toward us. But just as they got within a few yards, they veered off and swam around our little boat. It was abundantly clear that they were fully aware of our presence, and from that moment on, we had no fear. We just kept focusing on snapping one close-up photo after another. We came back to the main boat exhilarated and totally reassured that, giant as they were, these creatures would not harm us. Then, with whales continuing to parade past us, we signaled the other boat that we wanted to make a noontime stop at a small fishing village along the coast. So both boats headed into the narrow, rock-bound inlet and tied up for lunch at the fishermen's wharf. We were able to go ashore and talk with a few of these hardy Newfoundlanders, whose way of life remains a constant struggle for survival. We saw a load of filleted fish spread out on racks to dry. One of the young men in a small boat also displayed for us another commercial crop harvested from the sea, squid, plentiful here in certain seasons. While eating our picnic meals spread out in the cockpit, we appreciated the opportunity to observe the rugged setting of this small, close-knit coastal community. Back on the water again, we went farther out in the hope of seeing some other species of whales besides humpbacks. Ben Baxter kept a lookout from up in the rigging, and after a while of watchful waiting, there they were, a couple of long, sleek, fin-back whales. We got down in the Zodiacs again, and running parallel to the whales, we had to keep the motors going nearly at top speed just to keep up with them. These greyhounds of the sea, 60 or 70 feet long, cruised along the surface with just their backs showing, propelled by the smooth up and down underwater pumping of their powerful horizontal tails. We had had the rare privilege of a dramatic, close encounter peacefully with the second largest animal on earth, the fin whale. Returning to the boat, watch now, just to the left of the bow as a giant tail fluke flashes out of the water, showing us how large a humpback's tail really is. It took us some time to calm down and catch our breaths after this day's fabulous whale-watching adventures. But on our way back to Trinity that afternoon, watching the now familiar humpback dives, there was one more thrill awaiting us. The sight of a minke whale. They surfaced so quickly and briefly that if you blink, you miss seeing the small back and short dorsal fin. But this meant that we had viewed 3 different species of great whales on this one exciting day. Back at the village inn at the end of the day, we welcomed the opportunity for some local socializing at the Spouter Pub, which Peter maintains at the back of the inn. We also learned about another aspect of Dr. Beamish's work. Occasionally, a humpback whale becomes entangled in a fishing net, and Peter has set up a whale hotline, which fishermen can call if they find a whale caught in a net. Peter will send out a rescue party to try to save the whale by freeing it from the net, and also try to minimize the damage to the expensive fishing gear. Peter's family, including his wife and 2 young sons, lived with him at the inn year-round. It serves as a research center, and in the backyard he has on display the skulls of several species of dolphins and small whales found stranded in the area. On our 3rd day of whale watching out in Trinity Bay, the skies were again overcast and the water was dark, but we soon found ourselves heading into a sea full of small geysers where whales were surfacing almost everywhere. That morning we had a marvelous opportunity to observe the great variations in the patterns of black and white markings on the undersides of humpback whale tails, some almost entirely black, some almost all white. We could clearly see how scientists are able to distinguish and identify individual whales on the basis of each one's unique tail markings. Some whales can also be identified by the shape of the small dorsal fin in the middle of their back. When whales surface, they expel with an explosive whoosh the stale air from their lungs through the twin blowholes on the top of their head, and then inhale great volumes of fresh air to replenish their supply of oxygen. Very powerful muscles control the opening and closing of these giant life-essential air vents. Once again, to get even closer, small groups of us went out in the little Zodiacs. We found that on average these humpback whales came to the surface about every 10 or 15 minutes. One whale we nicknamed Notch because there was a small notch in the middle of its dorsal fin. We learned that actually several thousand North Atlantic humpback whales have been individually identified and cataloged by number, and in many cases given a name through studying photographs of their tails and other bodily markings. After about half a dozen surface breaths, our whales would raise their tails and dive down for another period of underwater foraging while we just waited on the surface for them to reappear. Then came for Meg and me what was perhaps the most thrilling experience of our entire lives. Sitting just a foot above the water on the edge of our little inflatable raft, suddenly we found ourselves literally surrounded by a whole pod of giant 45-foot humpback whales. We were right in the middle of them, so close that we could almost touch them. From this tail we had to look far out over the water up front to see the head appear. That's Meg in the blue knitted hat, snapping one incredible close-up after another. Not once did any whale touch our boat, but we were just overwhelmed with awe and wonder at the proximity of these magnificent, gentle giants. We lost ourselves in their presence, taking photo after photo and film shot after film shot. Finally, the last fluke waved farewell, and we were left to contemplate anew the incomparable wonder of one of God's greatest creations. We were a long time recovering from this unforgettable encounter. The following day the weather was rainy again, so our group took another van trip on land, this time up along the coast. Stopping on a rocky promontory, admiring the beautiful scenery, and watching the ocean waves converge upon the jagged shore, we were once more made aware of why Newfoundland is so justly famous for its picturesque and spectacular seascapes. There was a heavy fog when we started out on our final day of whale watching, but soon the weather cleared and we were once again in the presence of the humpbacks of Trinity Bay. Let us just enjoy this last Newfoundland voyage in the company of whales by watching them to the accompanying sound of ebb tide as played on the piano by Peter Beamish. Guess what Meg and I dreamed about on our way back to port, and still do much of the time since then.